Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck. I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once the secret Pentagon AI program finishes watching all these whistleblower interviews.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of them. It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely. But even if it's new science and not aliens...
Woohoo! It's a very exciting time. All right. Chuck, we've got a great big episode for you today.
Okay.
We're recording on our off week. For those of you who didn't hear our episode last week, there's a huge 3-part interview that Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp dropped on their podcast, Weaponized, with the author of the Immaculate Constellation document. For those of you who don't remember, in October of last year, journalist Michael Schellenberger put out an article about this secret government program. If this is sounding a little familiar, it's kind of like when Lou Elizondo came out. But basically, there was another unacknowledged special access program that in this case was called Immaculate Constellation and was responsible for like hoovering up all the UFO videos on the classified networks. The source at the time was anonymous. It made a big splash when the article hit, and it made an even bigger splash shortly after that when the second Congressional UAP hearing was held, and Michael Schellenberger was called to testify, and he, under oath, got up and introduced the Immaculate Constellation program to Congress. And the Immaculate Constellation report that he had referenced in his report was entered into the congressional record, which was kind of a big deal. Right. So although we still didn't know who wrote it, we got to read the report and see what it claimed. And in a nutshell, all week long,
now every time
I hear it, in a nutshell, it announced that there was this waived, unacknowledged special access program that was doing these things and was being illegally concealed from Congress. And then it also introduced a bunch of supporting evidence for this in the form of, here are videos that I found on secure servers. Here are photos I found on secure servers. Here's human intelligence sources I found on secure servers, all talking about UAPs, crash retrievals, reverse engineering, etc., etc. Big explosive document, but the source was anonymous until
so it's hard.
Last week, basically, when Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp started dropping a 3-part interview with the author, Matthew Brown. Now, Matthew Brown, it turns out to be a former U.S. national security official. It was kind of funny because at the time, all Schellenberger would say was that they worked at the DOD.
Not even he.
Yeah. So now we know he has worked at the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He's worked at the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security, and he's worked at the State Department. He held top secret and SCI clearances. He handled intelligence and weapons of mass destruction. And then he decided to become a whistleblower, and he wrote the Immaculate Constellation report, which he shared with Michael Schellenberger and was entered into the congressional record. And Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp talked about his path from being a security official to being someone who would write a report to submit to Congress and go to a journalist. How does this happen? So this interview was very strange. I got to admit, I've had a range of emotions about it. I watched all 3 hours. And my initial reaction when I finished was there wasn't really much here. Like, he talked a lot about Immaculate Constellation, but we already knew that stuff. He talked a lot about his process as a whistleblower, and while that's interesting, it is effectively the same thing that David Grush went through. Like, we're kind of familiar at this point with what does it look like for a whistleblower to go through DOPSR and all of that stuff. Right. And then the third episode dropped, and it was just kind of weird. Like, it kind of... They got into speculative territory, and he starts talking about, like, we live in the Matrix, and God is real, and all these weird quotes are getting dropped. I'm like, what is happening? Did I make a huge mistake in telling Chuck and everybody that we're doing a big episode on this? Thankfully, the other thing that I do is I save a lot of links from the community. I pay attention to the UFO community on Twitter and Reddit. So I had insight into what other people thought was interesting and groundbreaking about it. And once I sat down and started putting together the show notes, I realized not only is there a lot to talk about, this is probably going to be kind of a beefy episode. So apologies in advance to my extremely ADHD co-host. I've scheduled in some breaks for us.
Good. Yeah. I've got some snacks over here.
I
got all my fidgets. Got a new fidget recently, so this will be fine.
But yeah, let's start at the beginning. So he's working in the DoD, and he comes across this document, and he says, quote, "I came across this 100% accidentally."
Okay. Like, how does that happen? Like, are there just, like, do you just go to the military wiki and you're just like scrolling around in there and it's like, oh yeah, the UAP section, like,
right? It feels kind of crazy, right? I'm like, that can't be how it works. But that kind of is how it works. So Jeremy Corbell asks him the exact same question. He says, how do you just come across UFO videos in the Pentagon? What does that even mean? And Brown says, okay, so you have a clearance and there's a secret internet. And on that secret internet, there's just generic access. It's all very secret sensitive stuff, but more or less anyone can look at what's on there. Then you have on this secret internet some compartmentation, and then there's entirely different systems for truly sensitive stuff. But the point is that there's essentially a shared community of knowledge, and just like our internet, it goes back over decades.
Okay. So do you mind if I put on my network engineer hat? I should have changed the intro to include this. I started...
Let's get nerdy.
Awesome. So I started my career as a network engineer until I found out that involved generally crawling through like ducts and filth, dust, and whatnot. So I kind of shelved that. But I think there's some really interesting stuff about what they said there. And people may be like, what do you mean a secret internet? How does that work? But like in the beginning...
Yeah, I realize I don't actually know anything about this either. I know, broadly speaking, that DARPA developed what became the internet. But I guess beyond the general idea that I assume the military always has a better version of what we have, I don't really know what that means with regards to the internet. Is there literally like a separate DNS system? Is it on separate wires? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I will answer all of those. And I'll use an analogy from my work so that I'm not just making shit up, but we do something very similar. So when ARPA started, and this is like one of the things that people don't know, like the reason they got involved was they wanted to work on how to join together disparate networks. So like back then, all we had was, I don't know, what we would consider intranets now. Everyone had a different like school or office internet. So ARPA got involved. They did like IP addresses and stuff like that and started defining all that like routing stuff. But it was always about connecting disparate networks. And there was always this sort of assumption that there's going to be some stuff that's locked away that isn't available publicly. And that's still totally how it works today. So I was looking up the kind of government networks, and they have three big ones. They have NIPRNet, the non-classified Internet Protocol Router Network, and it's like is basically a VPN. As long as you've got a government-issued laptop, you can use this VPN. You can hook up to NipperNet. It's not bad. One of the links that I was able to find was, and I don't know if this is real, but confluence.usmc.mil.
I don't know if I feel great about the fact that the Marines are using Confluence, but all right, go ahead.
Right? But okay, sure. It gives you a flavor of like what NipperNet really is. It's
Sure.
So then there's SIPRNet, which is the Secret Internet Protocol Router Network.
Okay.
And this is interesting. So like on SIPRNet, they do have separate copper. And so they're only going to invest running copper between buildings if it's a fairly large investment. So so SIPRNet is going to be from like, think office buildings, maybe not skiff level secretness, but it's going to have its own copper. One of the challenges is, I'll talk about this in a second.
So hold on a second. So
yeah.
NipperNet is running on the same like physical infrastructure as the regular internet, phone lines, copper, everything.
Yeah.
It's just secured via a VPN, just like I would with a work network or something. SIPRNet is literally a parallel structure in terms of hardware. There's different wires connecting different access points.
Right. Yeah. You think about the red phone in the Oval Office, right? Like that's an actual its own line over to the Russian president's office. There's probably some other stuff in there, but you can think about it that way. But here's the cool thing about SIPRNet. Even though it's totally separate copper, it still uses DNS, still uses web browsers.
Sure. Why reinvent the wheel?
Right. It's just that DNS is not accessible to us. So at my work, we have datanerd.us and like you could go there in your browser right now and it just won't resolve because the DNS servers are only accessible to people on the VPN.
Okay.
With SIPRNet, we have something similar to that where all of our servers are actually in a separate data center and we do actually have, it's a virtual network. So it does still go over public, but sometimes. But we also have dedicated copper between some of our offices that go straight to the data center and don't go over public internet, which is a whole different story. Anyways, okay, so the last one, the Joint Worldwide Intelligence Communication System, JWICS, similar to SIPR.
I heard them mention this. They mentioned that you could find videos on JWICS.
Okay, JWICS, that's how they pronounce it. So exactly like SIPRNet, except only accessible from a skiff.
Okay. So the very secure internet.
Yeah. Which gives you a flavor. But one of the things I found was this document that talked about people who spend 75% of their time in a skiff. I was like, what does that mean? Like you're in a closet guarded by someone? And turns out a skiff can be a whole floor.
Yeah.
Like
so
of a building,
Matthew
right?
Brown mentions at one point when he has to go to his boss to talk about the thing that he found, he says, we need to go to the closet. And he says, now our entire office was a skiff, but we had to go to like a skiff within a skiff.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. So one of the docs I found was about how skiffs need to evolve. They said in a post-COVID world, but what I'm gathering is actually a post-pandemic world. Like they've discovered there's a new risk. Skiffs don't work when everyone is locked at home, and like they have to deal with this new risk. Anyways, so the thing that I came away from in this is like, I don't know if idle browsing is really something that happens.
Sure. So I didn't include this in the notes, but I will mention it briefly. They kind of ask him like, so you were actually, hold on a second. So this quote. So Matthew Brown says, the first exposure I had to Immaculate Constellation happened on a server that was shared by all the offices in OSD, the Office of the Secretary of Defense. What I was doing at the time was opening files that were clearly misfiled and either sorting them to our office as part of that server or putting them into their own box to be sorted by other responsibilities.
Interesting.
Right. And Corbell and Knapp kind of ask him, like, so this was your job? And he's like, I would call it volunteer work.
Okay, yeah, like he's doing a wiki cleanup, right?
He's doing it in his day job during office hours. It's something that's not his job, but it's not like he was just fucking around either. Like he was arguably doing something. But yeah, you know, like if I was at work cleaning up the wiki, like that's not really what my bosses are paying me to do.
But also they're probably kind of happy about it too.
Right.
It's better than going on X or Instagram or something.
For sure.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate a little bit of insight into how the secret internet works, and that we're not really talking about one internet, and we don't know which one he was on. They did mention JWix at one point and that he works in a skiff, so I'm assuming that's what he means, but that's me inferring. So point is, Matthew Brown is at work. He starts looking at misfiled files on the server, meaning they don't have the appropriate tagging, they're just out in a general folder or whatever.
Sure.
And he finds this one file. He says, this file was labeled 2018 Schreiver Wargames. It's a 12 to 15 page document, and there's nothing about it that screams interesting. A lot of Wargame briefs are pretty boring. There's just a generic title slide. There's a banner without classification markings. This part I think is kind of important. If it was a SAP, it would be flagged as a SAP.
Yeah.
So either this is a real document about an unacknowledged SAP, but it was not categorized correctly, or it is not an SAP and he was misled. But either way, the fact that it was not flagged as a secure document is important. So there's a banner without classification markings. It just says Immaculate Constellation, and it has a placeholder slide that shows the Schreiver Air Base logo and some logos of the units involved.
Huh. Okay. So 2 questions. What is Schreiver?
Schreiver is an Air Force base. It is now a Space Force base, actually. But apparently these war games are either planned by or run by Schreiver, even if they're held elsewhere.
Okay, cool. And then, so you mentioned Wargame, like, I'm guessing that's like a tabletop scenario. That kind of implies fictional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So war games are exactly what they sound like. They are readiness training exercises that the military conducts. They can be done by a single branch, a single unit. They can be cross-unit. In fact, when they talked about the Tic Tac incident, that was a naval carrier group in the area doing a training exercise. I don't know if it was a war game, but you definitely hear about this, where they will go do a simulated activity where they send actual troops, or other ones where it's all tabletop and simulated stuff. So it kind of spans the gamut. But yes, absolutely. It implies a fictional scenario.
Okay, cool.
We're definitely going to come back to that point. If there's anybody out there who's like, hold up, you can't just breeze past the document that he says is a secret, happens to be labeled as a war game. We're going to talk about that. But let's finish talking about what he sees in the document.
Okay.
So Brown says, so the next slide is where it gets interesting, because the face of Lou Elizondo is on that slide, and that is not who I was expecting to see.
Yeah. Big Daddy Lou. Like, yeah, what's he doing there? That's interesting.
Right? He says, it was accompanied by some text to summarize. Immaculate Constellation is an unacknowledged special access program established after the exposure of ATIP in 2017 by former USDI officer Lou Elizondo.
Okay, so, I mean, this fits. Like, after, like, the DoD would have to go through, like, a seismic internal reaction to such a high-profile whistleblower like Lou.
Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about this in the first time Immaculate Constellation came up. The idea that there would be some big internal shift in how they handle UAP stuff after Lou Elizondo makes perfect sense. Doesn't mean it's true, but it fits. Brown says the third slide jumps straight into the mission of this SAP, and it's showing what apparently the results of that mission are. and it's a collection incident in the Pacific Ocean. The subject of collection is several Russian naval intelligence vessels in the middle of the ocean at night, and above those vessels is a large black triangle floating in the air.
What is a collection or a collection incident?
Spying. Taking photos.
Spying. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So we're there like spying on the Russians, and we just happen to catch a UAP, or like what? Yeah.
Brown says, our collection assets were there monitoring Russian naval vessels. A large black triangle materializes or decloaks or something. The point is, it did not move. It appeared directly above those ships, probably no more than 200 meters. Very close. And interestingly, as noted in the report itself, there was no visible reaction from those vessels from what would almost certainly be considered a hostile approach.
What does no reaction mean? Like, I feel like if a massive black triangle appeared above my fleet, I would be reacting in some way.
Yeah, exactly. If nothing else, like, hey, what is that thing?
Right.
I find it interesting that he points out it would be considered a hostile approach. I wouldn't necessarily jump to the black triangle as hostile, but I always forget I don't have a military background. I'm not an active duty personnel. If I'm on a boat and a flying object suddenly appears overhead, I might reasonably jump to the conclusion, this might be American. This might be enemy. Yeah. Like, we need to be, oh, holy cow, why is this thing here? Certainly no reaction is unexpected. Brown says...
And 200 meters.
Yeah. Brown says the analysis in the text was that the Russian Navy had foreknowledge that this vehicle would appear in this area of the ocean, and they were there specifically to either collect on it themselves or to interact with it in some way.
Okay. So is this implying that the Russians also have their own psionic assets, or the whistle, and they can summon their own UAP?
I mean, that's certainly one way to read it, right? And that is, in fact, what David Grush and Jake Barber have been saying, that the Russians and the Chinese have been working on their own abilities to summon and collect UAPs. Another way to view it is just, hey, the Russians noticed this thing always appears over the ocean on Thursday nights at 4 o'clock, and they put their boat there. Another way to set it up is it was an arranged meeting. Like, we don't know, but the point is, it appears the Russians knew it was going to be there, and that is a very interesting possibility.
And they didn't start shooting at it. Or whatever. Okay, so what else was in that? Like, that sounds fascinating.
He says, after that slide, it was disappointing because we get into a couple slides of orbs, and I had already seen orbs at this point in an official setting.
What? I mean... I want to know about the orbs.
Right? I get it, right? Like, a Russian summoned black triangle is a hard act to follow, but tell me more.
Follow it anyways, man.
Brown says, based on the information included, the mission becomes apparent. It is the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission of global nature for UAPs and ARVs.
Remind me what ARV stands for. I can never remember this.
No, it's fair. Corbell asked the same thing. This term has been floating around since at least Stephen Greer's 2001 Disclosure Project press conference, where they said it stands for Alien Reproduction Vehicle. So the implication being that we have recovered crashed UAP and reverse engineered them to make our own. And those ones that we made are called ARVs. Brown actually is a little cagey here. He's like, I don't remember if it said ARV or just RV. I don't know what A stands for. RV is reproduction vehicle. A could be alien, anomalous, advanced. But so he kind of leaves it hanging.
If the R is reproduction, doesn't that sort of imply...
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
What I like about that is he didn't just blindly confirm. Yeah, everyone knows it stands for alien reproduction vehicle. He's like, I don't actually know that. The RV part I'm confident in. The A, less so.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Brown continued, he said, "We are collecting these incidents around the world. We're focused on the UAP RV collection incidents by tasked and untasked assets and the collection and analysis of those."
What is tasked and untasked? I've never heard that.
Tasked is when we know something is going to be there, right? Like we know that the Russian Navy is sending a ship to these coordinates, so we're monitoring those coordinates. Untasked is we happened to catch something while looking at something else. Case in point, we were there to look at the Russian ships and a UFO showed up. We didn't know a UFO was going to show up, but we collected on it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. That makes sense. So, okay, so how... I feel like I would have some feelings and reactions to finding a document like this on the secret internet.
Yeah, for sure.
How did he?
Brown is a little hesitant about it, right? Like he's very clear that he wasn't immediately a true believer. He says, the first time I read that, I don't know what I just read or if it's even real. Maybe somebody just made this thing, or they put it together literally for a war game, or they had maybe created an imaginary program that they maybe wanted to have, or a desired capability, or something that was representative of the true thing to be used. It's a weird thought, but this is what's going through my head because it's so bizarre. I'm looking at all the options why it's not what it appears to be.
Yeah. So that's fair questions. If war games are generally fictional, is there any info out there to kind of confirm it or talk about what actually happened when they ran that war game? Were there results or?
Yeah, for sure. I found an article on GPS World of all places, talking about the real world 2018 Schreiver Wargames. It says the Schreiver Wargame 2018 scenario, which is set in the year 2028, will explore critical space issues and investigate the integration activities of multiple agencies associated with space systems and services. The SW18 scenario depicts a notional peer space and cyberspace competitor seeking to achieve strategic goals by exploiting those domains. The scenario will also involve a full spectrum of threats across diverse operating environments to challenge civilian and military leaders, planners, and space system operators, as well as the capabilities they employ.
Okay, so this sounds more and more like a fictional scenario that someone made up because it feels compelling and tests the right things or something. I don't know.
Yeah, you're not alone in thinking that. I saw many Reddit posts along this line, but this particular one by Reddit user Chemical Plant 6487, I think kind of summarized it well. He said, look, this is pure speculation, but if I were to wargame the wargame theory, I could see something along the lines of the following being a reality. In 2017, Lou Elizondo comes out with his breaking UAP story in the New York Times. That story is popular within the military intelligence communities, and the team developing the scenario for the 2018 Schreiver Wargame decides to run with it. The team creates a backstory based on common UFO lore and photoshops some images of the Russian Navy working with a Black Triangle UAP as part of the conflict in the scenario. They then imagine a SAP called Immaculate Constellation as part of this scenario, and this scenario is one of several that the teams develop, but it is not ultimately chosen as the official 2018 Schreiver Wargame. The UAP scenario file is discarded, and Matthew Brown eventually discovers it.
You would think that a wargame scenario would be a little more grounded in real world military scenarios. Why bring UFOs into it? And I mean, unless these are I can see that the DoD treating these as one-off scenario, tabletop scenarios.
Like my D&D group. When our campaign gets a little stale, we'll run a one-shot. Yeah. No, I think that's a totally fair criticism. The Reddit user continued. He said, if that sounds ridiculous, another user pointed out that the U.S. Department of Defense Strategic Command has run war games on zombie apocalypse scenarios. Those briefings were also classified at one point.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it sounds like they probably have like a whole fun subculture about getting people to engage with topics.
Yeah,
Like, the
maybe.
airlines that do the interesting safety videos or something like that.
Yeah. I think what is important to say here is not, oh, this is definitely the answer, right?
Yeah.
But this is a possible and maybe plausible explanation for why he
Yeah.
would find this file. I still think it's a big stretch, but
Yeah.
it's absolutely not impossible. I think it's worth mentioning. Wikipedia, in an article talking about that zombie apocalypse scenario, said United States strategic command instructors found that a zombie survival plan made for a very useful and effective training tool while avoiding the political risks of using a real country in training scenarios.
Oh shit. Yes. That's so good. So yeah, that's like using example.com. Like you know that it's not a routable domain and never will be.
Yeah, nobody's going to mistake this for a real thing and cause a political incident.
Yeah, nobody's gonna like go out there and say, "Yeah, there's an Immaculate Constellation program." So interesting. Okay, so either this is a totally fictional program included in a war game, or it's a real program that was accidentally left in a random file for whatever reason.
Right.
Did he find anything that supported this beyond that wargame doc?
Yeah, absolutely. I will say this. This is a little bit frustrating because they ask him this question point blank and his answers kind of drift a little bit. I think he does answer the question and he answers it to my satisfaction, but I just want to kind of warn people, this answer is going to meander a bit. So the question being asked is there anything to tell us that Immaculate Constellation is real beyond this single file that happens to be labeled Wargame and makes it immediately suspect?
Yeah.
Brown, in his intro to the report that he eventually provided to Congress, says this document is the result of a multi-year internal investigation into the subjects of unidentified anomalous phenomena, technologies of unknown origin, and non-human intelligence. This investigation was undertaken in response to urgent and credible threats to the public good and safety of the United States. The data consulted during this investigation originate from non-public data held within the executive branch of the U.S. government. The author obtained access to this info while pursuing their lawful duties as an employee of the Department of Defense.
Is it possible that the urgent and credible threat was David Grush?
It's entirely possible. Yeah, he wrote this around the time that Grush was going public.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so after finding this one document, it sounds like he kept looking and found some supporting evidence. Did he share any of it? Because that sounds tasty.
Not publicly. So
Okay.
here's the thing I want to say. Do you remember when David Grush came out and he started talking about like he investigated this for years, he found all these people and corroborating stories, and his job as a national security analyst was to pull together information like this into informed opinions. And everybody kind of dismissed it as, oh, this is just a story that he heard from a guy. And like, okay, that's not untrue, but it's ignoring context. So I think similarly, there are a lot of people out there right now who are saying, oh, this is all based on a single, probably fictional document he found on a server. No, it's not. He found other evidence. What's frustrating for us as the public is he didn't share that evidence. He infers its existence. The report that he wrote for Congress is worth going and looking at. He includes 7 sections of support for his allegation. The first one of which is the Immaculate Constellation program based on the document he found. And then there are 6 other categories, including videos, photos, and human intelligence that he found in his exploration. So definitely there is more to it, but we don't have it, which makes it a little frustrating because it's like, yeah, trust me, I found more.
I mean, yeah, to your point though, like there are things that he can't share. And like Grush, if that was his job, then we kind of have to trust that someone chose him to do that work. And
right. Yeah, exactly. And he makes a big point. Well, I guess Corbell makes a big point of the fact that he did hold top secret SCI clearances. He passed polygraph tests. Like, they take those clearances seriously. They don't give them to just anybody. They follow up on those guys. So presumably he was considered stable enough to do his job involving weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
But I understand why this is a frustrating answer to me. One other supporting piece of evidence, when Michael Schellenberger reported on Immaculate Constellation, he found a second source, a former U.S. intelligence community official who confirmed the authenticity and existence of Immaculate Constellation, stating explicitly that program is run out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense.
Well, that is interesting. The first time you like mentioned that, or the first thought was like, oh, that's super compelling. My second thought is like, I have absolutely seen managers who will say, oh yeah, I think that's this department, and it's like, no, that is absolutely not a thing. Like, it's not a program we're running at work. Like,
I think it's one of those things like, okay, he comes forward and writes a report to Congress. He is pulling a whistleblower action. We will talk later about the consequences that has for him. It's not something you do lightly. He's not doing that based on a single document he found. The risks to him are too high. Similarly, journalists, when they publish articles like this, are under a lot of pressure to confirm with multiple sources. So is it possible that multiple sources lied or were misled? Absolutely. But each of these is a Lego brick kind of helping to build up this wall and stabilize it. In the interview, George Knapp says, so you read one document that said Immaculate Constellation and has some images in it. What additional information did you come across that reinforced your belief that there's a big surveillance program collecting this stuff?
I think that's a super good question, and it's like straight to the point. The thing I find myself wondering here is he reacting to like UAP in the report, or is he reacting to the like potential leakage of just the words Immaculate Constellation? Which is he actually caring about?
Who are you referring to?
Brown.
I mean, he's the one leaking Immaculate Constellation, so I don't think he cares about that.
Okay, yeah. All right. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm...
I may have misunderstood your question. I wasn't tracking it super well. But yeah, so Knapp asked him exactly the same question you did, right? Like, okay, so what, you found one document and that's it? Like, what else do you got? And Brown says, well, as supporting evidence, there's other programs that have since become public. The most relevant one in this case is the NRO Sentient program.
Wait, hang on. A sentient program? Like an AI sentient?
The Sentient program. Sentient is the name of this program. It's like an AI. More on that in a moment.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Brown says, look, sanitizing intelligence is a long-standing practice, especially for imagery intelligence, nothing specific to UFOs. Back in the Cold War days, if a facility or an aerospace platform was collected, there would be a full version for those who needed it. But if you just needed to see the facility and maybe not the plane, those would be manually excised. Now we have tools to do this for us. The Sentient program demonstrates how you don't need a massive workforce to do this anymore. You don't need buildings without windows for acres with people taking information and sanitizing it, making sure it gets to the right people without the wrong things in it.
Wow. Okay, so Sentient is a program to like sanitize images. Is that right?
Close. He's saying Immaculate Constellation is a program that does that. And he's using Sentient as an example of a program that does work that would formerly have been done by a building full of people.
I see. Oh man, that's weird. Like, so, okay, it's still some AI ML that's sanitizing docs and images. That seems like deeply problematic unless somehow they're doing a lot better than like our current LLMs today.
we're going to talk a little bit more about AI in a moment. I think it's
Okay.
important for us to kind of put a pin in our understanding of AI as a category of tool that exists in the
Yeah.
public today, and understand that what we're talking about here may be very different and maybe a
Hmm.
generational leap ahead of what we have in the public. The military's been
Yeah.
working on this stuff for a long time. But
Or it's just
yeah,
different, right?
yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah.
So Knapp goes on. He says, okay, so these images that would pop up here and there on some platform, this AI program, Immaculate Constellation, it would grab them, take them away, and then they're gone from those platforms. So, like the CIA. And Brown says, the data was ingested essentially in a stovepipe, right? It's locked off, it goes into the black box, and then a product comes out for what you're cleared to see and what you have a need to know to see.
Huh. I remember being confused about whether all information needs to go through Immaculate Constellation. This kind of sounds like more like an AI with right access to the entire secret internet.
Which
Which,
is a concerning idea.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I guess the point is, it is unclear how this program operates. They talk about
Yeah,
it in non-technical terms. So
yeah,
as
yeah.
technical dudes, we're like, hold up. Like,
Hold up.
what are you talking about? Is this like a filter that all information on JWix has to go through? Is it a spider that's actively seeking out and modifying files? Like, how does
Is it
this work?
both?
I'm going to be honest with you. We don't have the answer. He
Yeah,
does
of
not
course.
explain that. What he
Okay.
describes is the impact, which is this is a special access program that is supported by an AI tool
Hmm.
that hoovers up all the information on UFOs available in the networks, and they're a little abstract on this, apparently applies some degree of censorship, whether that
Okay.
is in a form that people are expecting or whether that is deleting active files. It's unclear. But there
Yeah.
was one exchange that I thought was really good, which is Knapp says, so wouldn't someone say, hey, where's my image that I recorded? Like, where did it go? And Brown says, there's a lot of people that have had incidents like that there.
Yeah. I think my initial reaction was like his that people would complain about
Mm-hmm.
that.
Sure.
Um but I think that if my drone spying on foreign adversaries filmed a UFO and I posted it on the secret internet and then it disappeared or was edited, I think I might just not say anything that would draw attention. Like
Yeah,
that's okay.
that's fine. I'm
Yeah,
backing
you know
away.
what? Cool. Yep. Didn't need that anyways.
That was my bad. I shouldn't have posted it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about AI. Knapp
Okay.
turns to
Yeah.
him at some point because he's describing this like
Yeah.
powerful AI system. He says, did we have an AI system in 2018 that could do what you're describing?
Yeah. 2018 was not like I don't know. Chat GPT was late 2022 and it sucked. Like I don't think it could handle a UFO cover up.
You wouldn't just plug like ChatGPT 1.0 into the secret internet
No.
and let it
No, I
go?
sure wouldn't.
Yeah. Brown answers very bluntly. He says, look, we know that we did have AI programs like that in 2018. Those documents have since become public. We're talking about Sentient. And the fact that Sentient was operational at those dates of the documents mean that it was operational for years before them, years before 2018.
Did he say when?
Wikipedia says that public records indicate that Sentient's development program began in 2009 and it was
Wow.
fully operational by 2015 at the latest.
That's crazy. Like I 2008 is always like my benchmark year because that's roundabouts when like the first iPhones were happening. And
That's a really good way to put it, right? We were on the first version of the iPhone. It wasn't even the
yeah.
3GS yet.
Yeah.
And the military was making an AI program that can scrub UFOs from satellites.
Yeah, yeah, it seemed okay. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so did it say anything more about what it does?
Yeah, so Wikipedia has a very understandable kind of headline statement. It says, Sentient is an artificial intelligence, space-based satellite data analysis system. It is described as a heavily classified artificial brain and automated system that allows intelligence agencies and armed forces to use satellite imagery and other data to autonomously find and track in real-time targets on or above the Earth from outer space.
Oh, I don't even know what that means.
Thankfully, there was an article in The Verge talking about this program when it hit the public, and they had a more understandable explanation.
Okay.
They said, all of the images from the NRO, the military, and these commercial satellite firms, combined with other geospatial intelligence, anything that has a time and location tag, create a vast amount of information that is far more than a literal army of people could comb through.
That's true.
To keep up with the fire hose of information, the NRO turns in part to AI. Sentient is, or at least aims to be, an omnivorous analysis tool, capable of devouring data of all sorts, making sense of the past and present, anticipating the future, and pointing satellites towards what it determines will be the most interesting parts of that future. That, ideally, makes things simpler downstream for human analysts.
Wow. So, wait. Now I'm getting the feeling that maybe Sentient isn't just about sanitizing, but also directing, and that's even.
It literally is. Yes.
So this feels like Skynet. Like literally, it's in charge of our satellites. And okay,
yeah,
it's
and
crazy.
it gets better. Sentient, which is not like it's secret, but it makes sense that they would have something like this, right? Ignore the worst, the word AI, which has become so overloaded as to be meaningless. It is kind of similar to saying they used computers. Like, well, yeah,
right.
Of course they did. The point is, they have a program that automatically looks at all of the information it has currently and makes a best guess about where they should be looking next. And I don't know whether it literally preemptively positions satellites or if it just makes a recommendation to a human author. But the point is, it's a tool. It is a tool that takes in all the information and helps them figure out what's worth looking at.
Yeah.
What's more interesting, because I didn't know anything about Sentient, but it rang a bell for me. So I went and searched through the archives, and hey, guess what?
Yeah.
There's a UFO connection.
Yeah.
The Black Vault received FOIA documents showing that Sentient detected a Tic Tac in 2021, which it reported to the UAP task force. And he also discovered that it may have a model built specifically for detecting UAP. There was a quote in an email that said, NRO's Sentient R&D as a UAP model to look for UAP redacted in imagery, but we need an external customer to ask for it to be turned on.
Oh my God. That's hilarious. Do we know, like, what do you think external customer means? Is that a different department?
I think it just means outside the NRO. So the NRO runs Sentient as a service that other intelligence agencies can utilize.
Yeah, of course.
So they're saying if the UAP task force wanted to use Sentient to look for UAPs,
hey,
we've got a model, but you have to tell us to turn it on.
Yeah, of course, because all the really good AI models are subscription based.
Right? Well, maybe if they hold out, the Chinese will release a free version.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let me we covered a lot. So he finds a document that outlines an unacknowledged SAP that hoovers up UAP data from military and intelligence sources. Then he spends 4 years finding supporting evidence and then goes public, right? Did I get that?
Not quite. I mean, broadly speaking, yes. But
Okay.
at first, he was interested in the document, but he didn't really know what to make of it.
Sure.
Brown says, so I do nothing for some time. And then our office gets training on what to do in cases of spillage for SAP materials. Spillage appears to be the term for when you are unintentionally exposed to material that you are not cleared to know. You do not have a need to know, but you somehow found out about it. There's processes to follow. You're supposed to go to your boss and sign some paperwork, yada, yada. So he says, well, I realized no matter how weird this is, this has all the hallmarks of being what you guys said is a big fucking deal. So I can either pretend like I didn't open it and read this thing 80 times and hope that no one notices that, or I can report it myself. So I did that, or I tried to.
Oh my God, 80 times. Imagine having to explain that you found something you probably shouldn't have and then opened it 79 times after that.
I swear it was just another open tab.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Brown says, so the first time I tried to report this, I went to my immediate supervisor and I say, I think we have a spillage thing. And he's like, show me what you found. The first slide, just because it's so generic, gets no reaction. But then going to the second slide, he's like, stop. Did you read this? And I don't answer him. I just look him in the eye. And the conversation ended with him saying, delete it. And then he left the room and we never spoke of it again.
Whoa. That is not the reaction I would expect for finding this.
Yeah.
Like, I thought he would either get chewed out or a pat on the back for finding it, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very strange reaction, right? And that was exactly how he felt. He's like, this didn't sit right with me. That's not what we're supposed to do. Everything we do on those systems, every click, every keystroke is monitored. Yeah. So I now know I have done something I shouldn't have. So out of self-preservation, I need to keep doing the right thing here. So I go to his boss's boss.
Yeah, bold, but I think that's the right answer. Go for the skip level.
Right. Yeah. Brown says, and this person says, okay, show me the material. He scrolls through it. There's no reaction on his face. And I'm watching him very closely at this point because I'm exceptionally curious about all this. No reaction. Then he makes a very deliberate scene where he pauses on Lou Elizondo's slide and starts guffawing in a very non-believable way and saying, someone's having a joke. You don't need to worry about this. You can go.
Like, I can't tell if he's meant to believe the reaction or see it as kind of a, like, almost veiled threat, or
right?
I'm laughing. If you know what's good for you, you'll laugh too, and then leave and delete this thing.
Yeah, nothing has happened. Yeah. And Brown says, that's not the reaction I was expecting. I tried to ask him, like, are you sure? Do I need to sign anything? And he's like, nope, you can go. So I left that room and went upstairs to see what had happened to the file, and it was gone.
So that's weird, but is there a chance that it really is a joke?
I mean, I guess. Like, anything's possible. I can't say no, but it's a weird setup for a joke. Like, hey, I made a document outlining a plausible scenario around how the DoD would cover up UFOs after Elizondo went public. Then I intentionally mislabeled it as a Wargame document. Then I hid it on a public server and waited for someone who was bored enough to poke around in their spare time. And then I never said anything to them about it. Gotcha!
Yeah, not to mention, I bet the military frowns on putting misleading stuff on official servers, just generally. Like,
yeah, again, Chuck and I are not military. We don't hold clearances, but I can't imagine that's the kind of thing that's approved of.
Serious people.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. If this was a joke, it's weird that his bosses didn't seem to care about the fact that someone is pulling a prank. If it's not a joke, it's weird that his bosses didn't seem to care that he was exposed to it. So either way, his boss's reactions twice are very strange.
Yeah, they just don't make much sense. Is this when he went public?
The timing of going to his bosses is unclear. All he says is, I did nothing for a while and then we received training. But I think this was fairly quickly after 2018. And this is when he starts digging for more UAP evidence, the start of his 4-year investigation.
Okay. Yeah. So what did he find?
Over time, we know from the report that he filed with Congress, he found a growing pile of intelligence showing that the government is paying a lot of attention to UFOs. There are loads of photos, videos, sighting reports, but there are 2 things in particular that he talks about that I want to talk about here. First up, Corbell asks him about this one video that he describes in the report of this disc-shaped craft flying in the clouds.
Okay.
And Brown says, yeah, the disc in the clouds video is pretty striking because you're watching it from space, and it's always cool to watch satellite feeds. It's just not something the general public gets to see. And then there's just the size of it. It was immediately like, whoa, what the hell is that? And it's almost playful in its activities, or like it was startled.
What does a playful or startled UFO look like?
That's exactly what they asked. He says, so it's just looking at an area over the ocean, and this thing comes trundling along underneath the cloud cover. It comes up, and then right when it's almost in the center frame, it suddenly scoots off to the side and tries to get out of frame.
Like, is he thinking that it was like trying to get out of the camera's frame or something?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what Brown implies, is the behavior of this thing implies that it became aware that it was being observed and fled. So that's kind of the startled reaction.
Yeah.
Now, he is very careful to say he doesn't know if it's alien. He says,
Sure.
Nothing in those videos necessarily proves it's extraterrestrial or non-human. It's certainly anomalous, exotic, unexplainable. Some of it may have been within our capabilities to replicate, even in an inferior manner, but quite a lot of it, it's either something else or we live in a world where we've been left behind.
Left behind?
Yeah. We'll talk about that more later. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but there's this idea that the group doing the reverse engineering is advancing quickly without sharing and becoming kind of a breakaway civilization. But one of the reasons I wanted to mention this weird video of the startled UFO in the clouds in particular is because Knapp and Corbell claim to have seen this particular video independently.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so Corbell, in an interview, said, I can tell you that with my investigations with George Knapp over the last decade, we've been exposed to a lot of military film footage where we have seen some of the footage that Matthew describes. That wasn't in the Immaculate Constellation report. This is footage that can be seen on some of the classified servers by anyone who has that access. Now, separate from that, people have leaked footage to me and George Knapp. That is not the case with Matthew Brown, but we were able to hear what he said and know that some of that footage does exist because I and George Knapp have both been exposed to it. The footage he described showing a disc that appeared startled in the clouds, I've seen that a long time ago, way before I ever met Matthew. And this is a piece of footage that within the intelligence community, if they have access to the servers, is kind of famous at this point.
I don't know how I feel about the idea of famous secrets.
Exactly. Exactly. Like, it kills me to know that there is good footage just sitting on the secret internet that anybody with a top secret clearance can view, but they won't release. Like, if so many people in the government have seen it at this point, it's not really top secret anymore, guys. Like, come on.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that Brown talked about that kind of compelled him to move forward with this beyond just a personal investigation, he says, when I was in USDI, I read the transcripts of Sean Kirkpatrick briefing Senator Rubio, Senator Warren, and Senator Gillibrand on the results of his investigation in the congressionally tasked Arrow report.
Was this like the first Arrow report to Congress, or do we know when this was?
Yeah, it's confusing because it wasn't the first UAP report to Congress, but it was the first one that Arrow produced under Sean Kirkpatrick's guidance. We've got episodes about this back in the archives. So Brown doesn't say specifically when this meeting was, but there was a big public meeting between Kirkpatrick and Gillibrand in April of 2023. And at the time, we knew that there was a classified meeting as well. I think that's what he's talking about.
That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Brown says, Kirkpatrick absolutely distorted, downplayed, and I can't prove it, but outright lied to the people who have direct responsibility for him. We just don't have enough data to really know what this is. We don't have any way of really figuring out what's going on. It could just be an anomaly. So, starting with an acknowledgement that you have some data, but we have the insight and the scientific expertise to make you feel at ease. And I immediately knew that I had inside knowledge into the deception of our government by elements of our intelligence community.
I mean, it sounds like Kirkpatrick's MO, so...
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. Brown said, my blood ran cold at a specific point where Mr. Rubio is discussing the legacy program. Now, this was a subject of direct discussion with Sean Kirkpatrick at these meetings. Interjecting here. That's fascinating because at the time they were kind of dancing around the idea of a legacy program. That was still a little bit taboo. So the idea that behind closed doors, they were directly grilling Kirkpatrick on whether a legacy program existed. Awesome. He says this is a direct subject of discussion, and based on Mr. Kirkpatrick's replies, as vague as they were, but unable to escape the truth of the legacy program, Mr. Rubio's response was, well, what the hell is the executive branch doing? Have they been running this for 60 years without congressional oversight?
Yeah. So is that seems like around the time that Rubio gave some public statements that made it clear he knew more about the topic and was quite upset.
Yeah. He said in a few different interviews that he has spoken with multiple first-hand whistleblowers with credible testimony, not just David Grush. And in June of 2023, he said, quote, it's very problematic if it's accurate, because if that is accurate, and again, I'm not in a position yet to make that judgment, but if that is accurate, what you're basically saying is that within the government of the United States, there is a group of people who believe that they possess something that they don't need to share with anybody, including elected officials who they view as temporary employees of the government. And, you know, in essence, some sort of internal military complex that is their own government and is accountable to no one. So it would be a huge problem if it's even partially true.
Yeah. That's a great point, and it kind of ups it a little bit. I've been thinking about Congress being annoyed about the like monetary aspects, but in some ways it is sort of a coup.
Quite literally, Congress is meant to have oversight on this. Like, that's right there. And even where the military has been able to show, like, actually, we need the ability to have some secrets, even there, after the church committee, the understanding was, at the very least, the Gang of Eight must have oversight.
Right.
Maybe you have a case to make that all of Congress doesn't have a need to know, but the Gang of Eight, bare minimum, does. And Marco Rubio was very upset to find out that was not happening. And we were getting a lot of very pointed comments around that time.
Yeah. So this doesn't prove anything about Brown's claims, but I definitely don't have trouble believing that Kirkpatrick tried to handwave away a legacy program to the point that a sitting senator got mad enough to start talking about an unaccountable military cabal.
Yeah, no big deal, right?
Yeah.
I think that is an important point. We made that point at the time, too, right? Like, sitting senators don't go near radioactive topics. They don't need to, especially someone operating at the level that Marco Rubio is. I have a lot of feelings about Marco Rubio personally, but there's no denying the fact that he was a very highly ranked senator. He didn't need to stick his neck out and talk about UFO whistleblowers and unaccountable military cabals. That didn't gain him any political points. If anything, it would operate against him. So the fact that something upset him so much that he couldn't stay quiet about it, I do find very compelling. But as you said, it doesn't prove anything about what Brown says. It just lines up with what we know about what was going on at the time.
Totally.
So around this time is when he decided to become a whistleblower. I'm going to quote a lot from a Liberation Times article here because
Okay.
this section of the interview was kind of all over the map and it would have taken forever to piece quotes together. And Liberation Times did a good job of kind of compressing it all down.
Yeah.
They say, aware that his superiors were not being truthful about what they knew, Brown decided to act. He brought his concerns to both the Senate Intelligence and Armed Services Committees, seeking whistleblower protection, knowing that committee members were urging whistleblowers to come forward. Brown described an initial meeting in which a staffer from the Intelligence Committee took his allegations and safety concerns seriously. He was then told to expect a meeting with a staffer from the Armed Services Committee, followed by a joint meeting with members from both committees.
That seems promising, and like I would feel comforted by that.
Yeah.
It's progress.
But according to Brown, follow-up meetings never materialized. Wanting to provide additional information, he reached out again. However, he describes being given the runaround. A staffer then sent a blunt response. And I'm going to give a little more clarity here. He was saying that he was very nervous about going to them, and he didn't tell them everything. He told them enough to say, like, look, here's the kind of things I know. I want to come in and meet with Congress and be able to, tell everything. But to protect himself, he didn't tell everything. So it's going well enough that he reaches out and says, look, I want to give you the rest of my information. What do I need to do to make that happen? A staffer then sent a blunt response, which Brown characterized as, quote, you either send me what you have in writing here on this non-official channel, or you don't. Brown sent the information, but was disillusioned by Congress's inaction to properly respond and protect whistleblowers.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know what a non-official channel means. Is that still top secret, or?
I'm assuming that means like email.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is not how you protect a whistleblower.
Right. Yeah. 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 That is demoralizing. This is when everyone is talking about better protections for whistleblowers, right?
Yeah. This is around the time Grush was coming out and stuff. Liberation Times says, in the winter of 2023 to 2024, Brown reconnected with the Senate Intelligence Committee, this time through a new staffer who had replaced the staffer he originally spoke to. Upon learning that no notes had been taken during his previous testimony, Brown decided to write his own report to send to Congress. And after submitting his report, Brown then met with permanent staff members from the Senate's Intelligence and Armed Services Committees.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Like, if it's important, you got to write your own thing.
Yep. But still fearing for his safety, Brown decided to reach out to select journalists. That is when he connected with journalism team Corbell and Knapp, as well as Michael Schellenberger. He sought permission to publish his report on Immaculate Constellation through the State Department's Bureau of Global Public Affairs, submitting it for pre-publication review. Once his report was approved for publication, Brown permitted Michael Schellenberger to publish some of its details.
Wow, so it went through Dopser and everything?
Yeah, and not only that, he received no pushback or requested changes.
I mean, just like Grush, right?
Absolutely. We've talked before about how Dopser is kind of a trap for the UFO cover-up because in order to claim it as a protected secret, they have to come out of the shadows, put their name on it, and admit it's real.
Yeah, right.
Liberation Times concludes, they say, the official, authorized, and full report was then delivered to Congress via Corbell, who also facilitated a series of in-person meetings for Brown with select members of Congress.
Yeah, so does that mean he's now eligible for whistleblower protections from Congress?
Oh, you sweet summer child.
Yeah, I figured.
George Knapp turns to him at this point in the interview and he says, there are other whistleblowers who worked in classified programs their whole life. That's what they do, how they pay their bills, and they're being held in limbo. That's being held over their heads so they don't come forward. We've heard promises like, oh, we'll help whistleblowers come forward. We'll give them support. There are private equity funds and organizations that say they're going to help, but we haven't seen shit so far, have we?
Ugh. Private
And
equity funds.
And Brown says, I have reached out directly to institutions that claim they are here to help UAP whistleblowers specifically, both in the process of coming forward and any sort of stability afterwards. Sorry, I want to make a note about the process of coming forward. He mentions this at one point. He's like, Congress is saying, come talk to us. How?
Right.
Like, there was no indication of how an actual member of the public should reach out and get in touch. And what ended up happening was he got in touch with another whistleblower who was already in contact. So, like, it was all word of mouth and referrals. There was no actual mechanism for anyone to come forward. And we talked about this with Arrow, but apparently the same was true of Congress. They were saying, come talk to us, but they weren't making it easy.
Yeah, right.
So he says he reached out to these groups that say they'll help with the process of coming forward and providing a form of stability afterwards. And it has been radio silence at best. And at worst, one of those institutions stole my information. There is no organized help for whistleblowers. It is all controlled. It is all either the special interest of industry that wants to get in on this, or by the existing powers that be. And Knapp clarifies, he says, you mean like intelligence agencies who have infiltrated or created these things. And Brown says, correct.
Wow. So not only did Congress not help protect him, but the groups set up to protect whistleblowers are actually like censoring or making things worse.
In some cases, it sounds like the traps. Yeah. So it is a minefield out there for whistleblowers. And as much as Congress is talking a big game about protecting them, they're not. And remember, we heard the same thing from Jake Barber. When he said he was going to become a whistleblower, he went to Congress expecting they would protect him. And as soon as he opens his mouth and starts talking about the threats he has received, the congressional people he's talking to are like, oh my God, yeah, that's happening to us too. Can you help us?
Oh my
He's like, I'm coming to you for help. So Brown says at one point, Knapp asks him, like, what are you risking by doing this? Like, what are the actual risks to you? And he says, I am on a personal level giving up the future that I made for myself and I was going to try to make for a family. My hope is that the stakes are not paid out, but they are life imprisonment and the possibility of execution.
Yikes. Yeah.
Knapp says, you've gotten to know some of these other whistleblowers who are still not public yet, but are at least close to coming forward. Is there strength in numbers? And Brown says, yes. If all of us die or are imprisoned, the seeds have been planted and more will come. Holy shit. Knapp says, do you think anyone has been killed because they knew too much on this topic? And Brown says, yes, I believe and I think, and I could probably help somebody else prove it. But lethal action has been taken against people that tried to get the truth out.
Yeah, we've heard that from other people too, right?
Yeah, both Grush and Barber said the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Corbell goes on, he says, we have had very disturbing personal threats that we take extremely seriously, not just with Matt, but with some of the other whistleblowers who have already recorded with us. This is serious. It's happening. There is a small army of whistleblowers ready to come forward. We've already recorded with them. The levee is breaking. The American public has not just a right, but a need to know.
Yeah. Well, despite the risks, he did submit the report to Congress, and talking to Michael Schellenberger, we know worked out because Schellenberger's article made a lot of waves, and then testifying at the second UAP hearing.
That's all true. Like, definitely, he did get the word out. He did connect with journalists. It did happen at the hearing, but Corbell and Knapp and Brown all talk about this, and they make it clear that the getting his stuff put into the congressional record and available for the hearing was a very rocky process with a lot of pushback. Corbell says getting something on congressional record is a little more tricky than people think. They have to have time with it. So I, very slowly, with Brown's authorization over those months, had in-person meetings, not just with Brown being there, but then working with them, showing them the information, so they had time to vet it. It was a process. There were a lot of phone conversations that we sat in on with the House staff, and they got curiouser and curiouser. The people who were in on these conversations with us, national security folks, just popping in on a meeting that I'm supposed to be having with them, and they wanted to know what assets George and I have. And they were saying at one point that we were going to testify in a skiff. And we were excited, but our federal lawyer said, do not go in there because they will immediately classify all that information, and then you're never reporting on it.
Oof. What a super bummer. Like, you want to talk to Congress, you want to trust that they'll do the right thing, but if there's a chance they can legally hamstring you, you have to just
and you got to assume that the people who are frothing at the mouth about this, Burchett and Luna and others like that, are not going to be the ones who risk it. But we have heard that there are members of Congress who either are themselves hostile to the topic, or at worst case are maybe in the pocket of people in the military who are part of the cover-up. If one of those people is in the meeting, they could then get the stuff classified. So it's not that this will happen, it's that it could happen. So their lawyer's like, you cannot do that.
Interesting.
And then even at the hearing itself, we heard about problems. I quoted this line at the time. Nancy Mace, in her opening statement, says, I'm not going to name names, but there are certain individuals who did not want this hearing to happen. They feared what might be disclosed, but we stood firm. No amount of outside pressure would ever keep me from pursuing a subject to ground come hell or high water.
Yeah, I remember that. But we didn't get any details, right?
No. And we still don't. Corbell and Brown and Knapp are all being very cagey about this, but they give some hints into what kinds of things were happening. Brown talked about why he thought they were pushing back on the idea of witness testimony. He says, I think it will take quite a change in our present circumstances for anybody to ever testify under oath on this subject again in a way that would make a difference. I think they know the power of, in an open hearing, putting your hand on the Bible and swearing you're going to speak nothing but the truth and doing so. It's symbolic and it's very valuable, and that is why I believe they are so desperately attempting to deny and control it.
Yeah, I mean, testimony under oath is pretty compelling. If you're trying to keep things secret, exerting pressure to keep that from happening makes sense to me.
Yeah, and we talked about this during both of the hearings. The idea that the witnesses were sworn in is a big deal because lying to Congress is a crime that has penalties. So if you get up there and make some wild claims about a UFO program and that's later proven to be false, you might go to prison for that. That's not something you do lightly. And Corbell says, yeah, absolutely. That's what we saw at the second hearing. It was absolutely controlled. Representative Burchett testified to it by saying it publicly that the executive branch did limit what could be said and by who.
Huh. I guess I missed that. Does that mean White House, Pentagon, CIA? Do we know?
That's a good question. This is one of my frustrations about this. We only have 3 branches of government, and all of the military and intelligence stuff is under the executive. So when we say executive, I think president, but we may be talking about a rogue program in the CIA. The president may have nothing to do with it. Who knows, though? Brown says the executive branch in the halls of Congress determining what the business of Congress is, and not even through the courtesy of a phone call to the vice president or the president, but through minions and stooges, unelected, probably CIA.
Does it matter that they were unelected?
That's something that a lot of people seemed to resonate with. The Liberation Times article about this was specifically called Unelected Officials Accused of Interfering with UAP Hearing. That said, I think regardless of whether they were unelected or not, the idea that someone that isn't part of Congress is interfering with Congress is a big deal.
Yeah, makes sense.
And Brown kind of concludes this by saying, look, after all of that, getting my testimony on the congressional record was a big win. And there was a bit of personal pleasure, too, because I got to see someone else be scared for once. not the bosses of the people who had interfered in Congress, but the minions themselves, because their bosses didn't tell them what was going to happen. By all appearances, both behind the scenes and in front of them, the submission of this report onto the congressional record and its announcement caught people by surprise. Its distribution was allegedly very tight, and these unelected members on these congressional staffs that get to set the agenda for our elected leaders had to scramble and adjust in real time. They panicked.
Okay. I'm glad that they explained this more. I didn't realize what it was, like how big of a deal it was to get the Immaculate Constellation report into congressional record, or just getting anything into congressional record. That, yeah, just makes me understand like the scope of the problem that whistleblowers have a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, again, we're not congressional people. We don't know. Yeah. I trust Knapp that he's right, that this doesn't happen lightly. On the other hand, sometimes it does seem to just happen. Like in the middle of the first UAP hearing, a member of Congress read the Wilson Brown memo into the record. That didn't seem to be a big production. That seemed to kind of happen on the spur of the moment. And that was the impression I got in the second hearing also, was they were like, hey, I'm giving you all a copy of this document. Corbell makes it clear that he had been doing the rounds and meeting with at least some members of Congress and laying the groundwork for this early. So,
yeah, but they kept it super tightly controlled. I remember them talking about that, and that's interesting to hear what the actual effect of that was.
Now, so far, we've talked about pretty straightforward things, I guess, as straightforward as it can be when you talk about finding a secret document outlining an illegal UFO cover-up program. But
right, yeah.
We talked about how Brown found the Immaculate Constellation document. We talked about his attempts to properly report this through his chain of command and his eventual path to becoming a whistleblower with Congress and going public. And this was all covered in the first two parts of Corbell and Knapp's interview.
Yeah, so now I want to know what's in that third part, and do I need to pull up the popcorn machine?
The third part is definitely full of the juiciest quotes, but it's also the least grounded information. This is the stuff that is mostly presented as his opinion. But the thing that I find frustrating about this, and I've watched the community kind of tearing itself in half over this, is he says things that I mentioned earlier. He says, like, we live in the Matrix, God is real. And everybody's like, what does that mean? What is his context for saying this? And there just isn't any. And what bothers me is people are presenting this as an either black and white situation, right? Either he's saying this because he read it in a document that he found on the secret servers, or this is just his opinion and it doesn't mean anything. And I think there's a little more nuance to this. I would also like more clarification. But for example, are these well-informed opinions backed by research he is doing, where he has not seen this explicitly stated as a fact, but he's read 7 other things that lead him to this conclusion? Right. Or are these things he has heard from other people but doesn't have firsthand things? Or is he just kind of guessing the way that any of us are, right? Like you and I have personal pet theories about what this stuff is likely to be, but we don't know anything. That's just guessing. Right. That's a range of things. None of them are, I know this to be true, but there's a big difference between, I read 7 different sources saying these types of things, and it leads me with a reasonable confidence to conclude that this is what's happening, versus, I don't know, this is what makes sense to me. And they just don't clarify that. So I give Corbell and Knapp a lot of credit. But I also want to kind of set the tone for you here. Matthew Brown is rigid with tension this entire interview. He is clearly incredibly uncomfortable. And he is very obviously falling back on professional briefing behavior. He keeps his hands crossed in front of him. He answers questions clearly and directly. He clarifies when he doesn't know something directly. Like, this is clearly like the way you deal with things in government. But he's also very obviously deeply, deeply stressed. His lip is quivering at one point. His eyes are like stressed. And it's a 3-hour interview, right? We get to watch it broken up into 3 episodes. But he appears to have just sat at a table with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell and been peppered with questions for 3 hours straight. So the third part of the interview appears to be consecutively the third part that was filmed. Like, they're at the table. He's been doing this for a while. He's tired. And Corbell and Knapp are hitting the kind of like loosey-gooseier questions. Who is they? Why are they doing this? What do you think is the meaning behind this? Who's flying these craft? These kinds of things.
Okay.
And they've caught a little bit of criticism about this. And Corbell put up a post saying, look, there's a very clear point in the interview where we switch from factual information to opinion and philosophy. I think that's very clear, and I think it's fine. And he's not wrong. But as we said, there's a lot of like middle ground in what that means. And I wish that they had asked some follow-up questions on some of the things he said. My hope is that we're eventually going to get a follow-up interview with him where someone will ask these follow-up questions and we'll get some clarification, because some of these statements, he just kind of lets them fall, and they're wild. They're absolutely wild. They're fascinating. They're fun to talk about. I don't know what to make of any of them. I watched another guy do a reaction video, where he talked about like the 10 most incredible things that Matthew Brown said. And at one of the points he says something, and the guy just looks at the camera. He goes, "What am I supposed to do with that?"
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've kind of broke.
Like,
go ahead.
I'm sort of torn between two different things. Like, on the one hand, I want to say like, yeah, after 3 hours, like, I get a little bit weird too.
It doesn't even take 3 hours.
I know, right? Yeah, for us it's like 20 minutes. But also, like, you can be crazy and right. Also, like,
yeah. So I've kind of broken this up because I had to do quite a bit of like piecemeal arranging of quotes. He said this here, he said that here. These seem to be related. So this last section is definitely a part where I am having to construct a bit more than the earlier stuff that was relatively factual. But I've kind of broken it up into a few sections. The first one I want to talk about is just secrecy, right? Like, there is a secret being kept. Why? For what reason? What does the secrecy apparatus look like? Early on in the first interview, actually, Brown says, after the New York Times article, there was a clampdown on UFO discussion. The screws were tightened, and in certain agencies, you're not allowed to mention certain whistleblowers' names, or you'll be fired immediately. David Grush's name was absolutely, from first-hand experience, sort of radioactive in the chat rooms. All of a sudden, these people that never participate are there, really slamming him and slamming the people talking about him.
That's interesting. Like, it sounds like he's implying that they're running disinfo tactics. But I also wonder if it's people that are unhappy with what Grush did suddenly appearing in rooms too.
And this is the problem with a well-run disinfo campaign, is it's indistinguishable. You know, like, you have to kind of read the tea leaves of the overall pattern of the room and recognize, oh, okay, every time Grush is mentioned, there's a huge uptick in these people who aren't there for any other topic.
Right.
But maybe they're just there legitimately because they don't like Grush. Unclear.
Who knows? Yeah.
Brown says, when he's asked, like, why is this secret? Should it be secret? He says, look, if this was just technology that we were worried about protecting and maintaining military advantage, there's strong arguments to be made that the American people be left in the dark about where science and technology and their military are taking them. But this isn't just technology. This isn't something somebody came up with in a lab and it's sensitive because once the cat's out of the bag, anyone can do it. Fundamentally, this comes from the biggest question, which is humanity alone? And the answer is no. And the secrecy that has been defended is at the cost of, in my mind, human dignity, freedom, and progress. It is no longer permissible or acceptable, in my mind, to continue this course, to deprive another generation, not just of Americans, but of humanity, of their birthright to know who they are, where they came from, and what is with us.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this so many times. Like, you keep the weapon tech secret, but non-human intelligence can't be a national secret. It's too much.
It's too big. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brown says it's a parallel reality. The secrecy apparatus is all pervasive. It's not just in the intelligence community governing their world. It's not just the military protecting their operations. It has been allowed to corrupt and infest every aspect of our society to serve the interests and whims of a very elite select few.
Oof. Elite select few. Who does he mean by that?
And this is one of the points where we have to read between the lines. He doesn't say. Now, I've got a few more quotes here that I'm going to give you that kind of paint a picture of what he thinks. But this could be interpreted a number of different ways. The way I've seen most people interpret it is this idea of a breakaway civilization. So let's talk about it in that aspect. Brown says, I think our military has a long historic involvement in this, and so does our intelligence community and our scientific academic community. We have, as a country, allowed ourselves to be penetrated, co-opted, and corrupted by an internationalist force that serves their interests and views nations, peoples, and tools as means to an end.
This reminds me of Jake Barber talking about there being multiple groups trying to retrieve downed craft, and not all the groups were from government agencies.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of shocking to hear, right? If you're like me, you kind of made your peace with the idea of okay, if UFOs are real and they're non-human, it makes sense that governments would have action teams tasked to recover them when they go down. I totally believe that. The idea that there would be non-governmental agencies who are out there getting in firefights over who gets to take this particular crash home, that's deeply upsetting. And that kind of echoes what he's saying here, right? An internationalist force, that's a very particular phrase.
Yeah.
Brown says, UAP secrecy does not ultimately reside in the government anymore. This is held in an illegal internationalist regime, some sort of international cabal of sorts, a mix of corporate, military, political, intelligence, and criminal interests that have come together. And they have subverted us and have taken this and made this the source of their wealth and power.
A cabal. Now we're talking. This is some dystopian shit right here.
Yeah. Now, okay, so like I said, what's interesting is this kind of ties into a long-standing idea in the UFO community that some of what we see may be human, but not like American, Russian, or Chinese. It's from a breakaway civilization.
Yeah, okay, I want to know more. But I have a response to this as well.
That's fair.
Yeah, tell me more.
We're going out on a limb here. And like I said, I want to be clear. This section of the interview is a little frustrating because it's unclear how grounded these opinions are in background, right? But again, this idea of a breakaway civilization has been out there for a while. So speaking about that more broadly, the idea is that there's a secret group. Perhaps it was originally part of the military or originally part of an international aerospace corporation, but they're running their own successful crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs that are answerable to no one, right? So if we accept that Lockheed was given a downed UFO in the late 40s, early 50s, and they managed to develop some stuff, and eventually they start contracting with the government to go out and recover more UFOs so that it's plausibly deniable and the government's not involved. At some point, maybe some of it got shunted into their own private R&D and just didn't get reported back to the government because who's going to stop them?
Right.
Maybe they start a secret space force. Maybe they travel outside our planet. Maybe they meet non-human intelligence and have their own treaties with them. Eventually, their tech gets so far advanced that they are effectively a generational leap beyond the rest of the planet.
Yeah. So if we set aside the tech and the secrecy for a second, like what would their motivation be, and why would they be coming back?
Yeah. Um, power, wealth, like
Yeah,
all the
right.
usual bullshit. This stuff sometimes ties uncomfortably into Nazi stories. There's this idea
Mm-hmm.
that the Nazis slipped away to Argentina at the end of the World War and continued developing their advanced aerospace, and eventually they created UFOs. But
Yeah.
nowadays, it doesn't have to be Nazis. It's just as likely to be a rogue corporation that just doesn't feel accountable to any government anymore. Have they left Earth and returned? Have they never left? Are they here? How advanced are they? All of that is the hazy edges of the nugget of this theory, which is that
Yeah.
someone has managed to make a generational leap via crash retrieval technology, and that is now a problem.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
exact shape of that problem is unclear, the details are unclear, but that's kind of the narrative that I hear echoed when Brown says, an international cabal, a mix of
Right.
corporate, military, political, intelligence, and criminal interests. I immediately hear the breakaway civilization theory in that.
Yeah, I just find it, the thing I find most suspicious about this is that we still have entirely too many billionaires knocking around.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, we get Musk wouldn't make the cut because he's kind of annoying, but you
Mm-hmm.
know that Peter Thiel would be running his own program and would
So
somehow work his way in.
there's actually an answer to this.
Yeah.
The idea is there's another Musk out there that we don't know about who's in on the secret shit, and he doesn't need to be public because he already has everything he wants. The billionaires we know about are the ones who aren't part of the breakaway civilization. And part of the reason they're pissed is they've been iced out of it, right? Like, what do you
Yeah.
mean Lockheed was given a UFO in the
Right.
40s? Hold the fuck up. Like, that's not
Hmm.
right. Again, I don't
Yeah.
necessarily buy this. We are firmly in conspiracy theory territory, but I'm
Yeah.
hearing
Okay.
echoes of it in what Brown says. I
Yeah.
will
Okay.
quote from an unrelated person something that kind of
Okay.
supports this idea of why a group might decide that they become unanswerable.
Oh, sure.
There's a guy named Bernard Heisch, and he quoted an unnamed intelligence officer. This guy said, quote, "The elite involved in the black programs are among the smartest people on the planet, but even so remain deeply puzzled by much of what they've learned. They tend to regard the public with disdain, like undisciplined and unruly children incapable of handling information of extraordinary complexity. While officially supporting democracy, the black program elite in reality espouse a kind of benevolent dictatorship or enlightened oligarchy by those, such as themselves, who have earned the right to know and to make decisions in the best interest of civilization, to which the ordinary person, being lazy and easily distracted, is not motivated or qualified to contribute anyway."
Yeah. I mean, I can't disagree with them in most cases. I don't know if that makes me a black
Right.
program elite material, but
Well, and without even going to breakaway civilization levels, we have heard repeatedly the idea that the people in charge of the UFO secret view the president as a temporary employee.
mm, yeah,
And I don't agree with that, but I can understand how, if you are running a decades long secret, the idea that someone like Trump might come in and in 4 years just torpedo everything you're doing. Like we
yeah,
see this happen with NASA. NASA
yeah, we
repeatedly has to
do.
reset, and that's just a regular public organization. If you're running
Yeah,
something that you think is a life changing secret that is worth defending to the death, I
right.
can understand how you get to the point where you view
Yep.
anybody outside the program as kind of irrelevant and at worst a risk. I don't agree
Yeah,
with it, Again, we're firmly in conspiracy territory,
Yeah.
but there is a through line that I can follow for how somebody who has already accepted step one, that this should be kept a secret, follows up with all the
Yeah.
successive steps that maybe
Yeah.
eventually lead to something like this.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so this is good good navel gazing. Good thing. Interesting to think about. Um but I can't help but notice that Brown has neatly avoided talking about non-human intelligence.
Oh, you noticed that.
Yeah. Presumably these like crash retrievals aren't coming from nowhere. Who's making them?
Yeah. Corbell at one point blank asks him, "Who are the others? Why are they here?" And Brown, to his credit, again in business mode, goes, "I need to be clear. I have not been exposed to any direct information on the anatomy, biology, intentions, culture, or politics."
It's funny the EBO scientist had those as like 5 headers in the document, right?
Yeah, two pieces of the puzzle here. We should introduce these guys.
Yeah, right.
That said, Brown does go on to kind of theorize under pressure from Corbell and Knapp. He says, "I think they're both just as powerful as we think, but also less. And I think there is not a single they here. Certainly multiple factions of the same species, if not multiple species, and all the complexity that brings, which might be our best hope."
Yeah, I mean that does align with Eric Davis talking about 4 alien species with Congress, but still, like, why are they here?
Mm-hmm. Brown, very late in the interview, says, "I have a good degree of confidence that the reason they're here is us. I think life, especially sentient life, is a precious thing, and I think to some it might be a resource. I think humanity, to some level, is a resource for them. Possibly a commodity, possibly a form of entertainment, possibly medical related. It appears they've been here for most of recorded history, and I think some element of this has been here for most of human recorded history."
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. The commodity is not my favorite term for us,
Yeah.
but it totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Big features.
And yes, and I want to clarify on this because this is an idea that's been floating around in the community for a long time. There's 100 different ways to interpret what it means for us to be a resource or a commodity, ranging from the demonic style, they feed on our negative energy and that's why they infiltrate our governments and keep us all hating each other and sick.
Yes, that makes sense.
You might just have the medical idea, like there's a often quoted idea that the Greys are us from the future and their genetic situation has suffered and they are coming back in time basically to extract healthy genes from earlier in their own gene pool.
Sure.
Or maybe we're just like in a zoo.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I could see us being a form of entertainment, like it's like the biggest reality TV show ever.
I didn't come here to make friends, Chuck.
Exactly. Get him off the island. Anyways, okay, so breakaway civilizations, alien species. This is good. But I thought we were gonna get weird. Like, lay it on me.
All right. Here's the weirdest shit. Brown
Okay.
says, and I think this is interesting that he clarifies this. So this comes after he says, "I do not know about biology, anatomy, all of that." He says explicitly, "What I have learned," implying this is not theory. He has
Yeah.
explicitly learned this. "What I have learned is that we live in a dream, a carefully constructed reality. We make use of a science that is tightly controlled and suppressed and distorted. I think we are left behind. The normal humans have been left behind."
Woo. Yeah, constructed reality. I don't know. I think it's pretty good reality, but does he expand on it?
says people need to understand that we might have freedom of speech, but that has been subverted. We do not have freedom of inquiry. We are blocked from learning what we need to know just in the public world. We are blocked from advancing in science. We are taught false science intentionally to prevent us from learning more. We live in the Matrix. It's just much more boring than the movie.
It's so, I mean, it's so perfect. Like,
Yeah.
of course it would be so much more boring than the movie.
Well, and not to nerd out about the movie, but in the movie, like, Agent Smith makes that exact point. Like, early versions of the Matrix, we gave you a paradise, and it was a disaster. You couldn't handle it. We had to put you in this horrible, toxic late 20th century because it's the only thing your brains could accept.
Yeah. I don't know what this says about us.
It's unclear if he thinks we're literally in a Matrix-like simulation, or if he means that by controlling what we're allowed to study, we are effectively in a simulation. He doesn't expand on it. That said, the idea that advanced science has been kept from us is a really common conspiracy theory, right? Look at the fact that when Tesla died, his files were seized by the government and are still classified. The rumor has always been that he cracked anti-gravity or zero-point energy or whatever your personal theory is. So again, this idea of a breakaway civilization that has managed to keep advancing while holding the rest of us back kind of comes through again. Brown says, ultimately, my biggest fear is what humanity will do to itself out of fear and greed. We have built a prison around ourselves. It is invisible, but it's not complete, and there is still time to maybe alter our trajectory.
Yeah. So, I mean, getting a little philosophical now, did the like breakaway civilization build the prison, or aliens, or was it us?
Right. And again, is it a literal prison? Is this a metaphorical prison? I can't help but read this in the vein of the Law of One and the kind of stuff Anjali talks about, that humanity needs to evolve spiritually and time is running out for us to get our shit together.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So how much time do we have?
I mean, 2027, 2030, 2050, the date's always changing. You know, it's got to be close enough to feel urgent, but far enough out to lose track of.
Yeah. All right. Well, my bet is on 2038, the end of 32-bit time.
Oh, all right. Nice. Tie it up with a Unix problem as well. I love it.
Yeah, of course.
So, okay. I know we have gone so long here. Our timer is at 2 hours. I hope that our listeners, your timer is a little shorter than that.
Maybe.
But Corbell turns to him at the very end. He says, look, if you were to die tomorrow because of whatever reason, what do you want people to know? And Brown kind of leans back and thinks for a second, and he says, you are not free. And this reality has far more to it than you have been allowed to believe. And God is real.
Okay. Where'd that come from? Is there a file about this in the CIA? I mean,
who knows, right? That's literally the last thing he says. Freaking credits roll. I'm
my God.
Ask more.
Mic drop. Man, what a roller coaster. That's
right?
Absolutely nuts. Thank you for watching a 3-hour interview, so I didn't have to.
I mean, I made you sit through a 2-hour recap of a 3-hour interview, so I'm not sure how much time I've actually saved you. But
fair point. That was more enjoyable.
Right. Oh, I'm glad. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us here on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our Discord and social media accounts.
And if you made it here, you probably already know you can email us at scottorchuck@veryexcitingtime.com. And you know how to support us at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, or grab t-shirts from veryexcitingtime.com/merch.
That's right. And Chuck, as always, my wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs so she doesn't have to.